I'm director Dustin Ferguson, and you're listening to The Movie Raid.
It's time for The Movie Raid, and tonight's victim is director Dustin Ferguson. Has done many films, and one of them including Angry Asian Killer Hornets. Hello.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Tell us the deal with this movie. Is this like a spoof movie, or is this like a series, one of those old school type like Ants or Ticks or anything like that type film?
That's exactly what it is. I mean, it's a throwback to like the old 50s giant bug movies. You know, it's real tongue-in-cheek. The thing is, obviously, we shot a lot of this movie during lockdown, but it was shot by all the individual people involved. And so, like, a lot of the actors filmed themselves and then sent me the footage. And so we had to be very clever in how it was shot, by having people shoot themselves individually so that I could go in and superimpose giant murder hornets, you know, killer hornets and all the scenes.
Now, how was that, as far as the acting part of that? How were they really dealing with that in terms of different kind of method that they're not really accustomed to, at least on a daily basis? How do they actually work that out and still make it sellable to the audience to where they can get that kind of emotional from these types of giant killer insects?
Well, really, with this project, you know, and the one I did before, which was Cellular 5G Zombies, I approached actors that I could really trust that could deliver under these sort of circumstances. So everybody involved was really talented. I even had a couple bigger names like Sean T. Phillips that did scenes of those films that are used to working on these types of films as it is. A lot of them are actors I work with time and time again that are used to the B movies that we make and how we make them. So all I really had to do was just give them direction. A lot of them I talked to over the phone or sent them messages, told them what to do. They did it several different times, different ways, and sent me all the different takes. So it was really no different than if I was there shooting it myself. You know, I had lots of options and could go through and edit the best version of everything. I found what I've done is sort of, in a way, reinvent things, just in a modern way, but with the old school approach. Because you look at monster movies that come out now by Sci-Fi Channel, they're very modern in their approach. They're all about technology. They're very quick editing and fast-paced movies, done very differently than movies were done 50, 70 years ago. And so my approach with it is to stylize it and edit it and pace it the way that the old movies were done, but set it obviously today. So it's really like watching Ants, but they happen to have cell phones in it. It's really the only difference as far as the way I approach it. So that way fans of the genre are almost like getting new old films. It's films that are done the old way that nobody else is really doing. I mean, people make homages often and stuff, but I've sort of built my whole career around molding my films on the patterns and the ways that they were approached 30, 40 years ago. And so something like this came very natural. It was actually a lot of fun and sort of a challenge to make it very like reminiscent of the older stuff. Because I've never really done anything that's like a throwback to the 50s sort of style. It's always like 70s, 80s, 90s movies is kind of where I wander. I think it came together very well. I think that all of the actors involved gave it their all, and it comes out in less than 2 weeks. So I guess the fans will decide for themselves.
Compared to all your other films that you have done, would you say stylizing is more about for the structure of the actual overcome of the film itself as a foreground, as opposite to characterization?
I treat my sets as a character themselves. A lot of my movies are very artistic. I use the artistry of them to overcome the budget restraints. You know, a lot of people that are shooting things low budget, especially out here in LA, they shoot them, in their condos, they do them at home, they do them on the things they have. And I happen to live in SoCal, having access to the mountains and the trails and the forests and the lakes. And so I can really utilize that stuff. And so, like the old traditional, slasher movies of the 80s, I can set them out in the woods and do lots of scenic shots and montages and stuff. And so it's sort of like, as a whole, becomes one thing. And so, to me, the characters are definitely important. The characterization, the delivery, and all of that definitely is always important. But it's almost as equally as important as the setting and the structure and the framing and artistry. The synchronicity of the imagery with what you're hearing, like the soundtrack plays a huge part. Most people don't realize that. You take away a soundtrack or change it, and it completely changes the perception of the film. It's like a finesse of blending the two to create something that hooks people in. And so I think the artistry of independent films is very important in keeping people interested in the film and having the longevity where people, come back time and time again to watch it, and then grows into a B film. Just right before this interview, I was out for an hour shooting nature shots for the movie, to blend in all the scenes and build up, the emotion and have the music and everything. So it's something that I do every time. That it's basically expected in all of my films.
Would you say sometimes this is actually losing some of its focus on some of these filmmakers that they want to get their movie out there, they want to get their vision out there, but they're kind of going in the wrong direction on some of these visions. Some of the visions look really good, but sometimes it's not enough. It's not enough, so to speak, finesse, but to give that artistic value to it. Do you think some of that artistic value is kind of dwindling down just a little bit as time goes for these independent films when they're trying to release them to the public?
Oh, exactly. I think that there's a typical mindset. Most people think they're making their masterpiece, the first thing that they go do. And then that usually weeds out most filmmakers. They go and make their first movie, nothing happens, they give up. But then there's other people that will keep going and going because they're looking at it like it's some sort of product, and that's all that they care about. Most people in Hollywood, for example. But then you have people that are sort of on the outskirts that, like for me, for example, I've made a career out of it now. I can do films that are work for hire on the side as my other job, so that then I can still make 7 or 8 other movies that are truly independent the way I want them to be, and I can keep the artistry in them. So I think there's definitely like a balance you have to find, but I think in order to succeed and keep going, you have to find your niche. You have to be an artist. That's really the only thing that attracts people when you're looking at the big picture.
Succeeding in projects can be very fulfilling, of course, as far as experience goes, but if ego doesn't affect that, especially as a director, how do you perceive as being a successor or becoming an ongoing successee, so to speak?
You have to be modest and humble, and I am, because I come from humble beginnings. I grew up in Nebraska. I only moved to California less than 3 years ago, and so I made over 50 films while I was living there. Especially at the time when you're making movies, you talk to people about it, they can't take it serious, or they're like, oh, that's cute, so what's your real job? That's sort of the mentality there. And I think that in a way that ended up being a blessing for me, because it proved to be a challenge I overcame when I moved to California, because now I'm very different from a lot of the other filmmakers. I'm not out there, I'm not a snake. I'm not trying to climb my way to the top. I've already found my place, and I can just do my movies to make myself happy. And I look at like my social media and my other accounts as a way to just spread the awareness of what I do, whereas a lot of people are about taking a selfie to brag. But I use that platform to be inspirational. I almost once a week I post something that's encouraging to other people to chase their dreams. I make it a point, because I wouldn't be here if I didn't do that.
Yeah, because oftentimes it can be about credibility. Oh, you've done this film, Oh, and then you're going to ease on to other films that you've been invited to, so you can further get that out there. And then sometimes this will affect that director's or other artists' judgment and even vision, because as this keeps going, even though you succeed, which is great, but the problem is success can also be a burden if you don't maintain it in a way that you can still make it a positive thing and still be known for what you are as an artist himself.
Oh, exactly. You have to look at the way things are now and sort of adapt it, just like I've done with the films. Like today, it's about branding. Instagram and Facebook, and everyone's a social media star because they have a brand. You got to look at that concept and approach it the way, like, I want to be a John Carpenter or a George Romero or a Roger Corman. And so in order to do that, I have to adapt the new methods to build my brand into being that sort of thing. And I think that a lot of filmmakers don't grasp that concept. They just understand Facebook or Instagram as, oh, post my stuff so people know what I'm doing. They don't see the big picture that you're structuring a character and something that you're presenting to society that society itself is buying into as a whole. Like, I'm only going to sustain if I actually have fans that come back and buy my movies more than once. Can't just pawn your stuff and expect to make a living. You have to have people that want you to succeed and that will lift you up and want to follow you and like your films and want to give you their money. That's really today the only way you can sustain as an artist.
And as far as getting that support as well, it's like maturity in terms of growing as the art goes in all your projects, and it's succeeding. You're forming the art. You're actually putting a structure around it. You're putting a foundation around it and having to move forward. And maturity is important, because when you are moving forward with this, it helps you along and you get followers and so forth. That's where the maturity part goes, because now you have more of an establishment, and now you have a more on-set mind of continuing to do other projects like this without actually having to make it look like it's some kind of a brand on a soda can somewhere.
Oh, exactly. Because you have to approach it as, really just as a lifestyle, like a way of living. Like, for me, when the pandemic happened, everybody's just like, oh, not going to be making movies for the next 6 months. For someone like me, I'm like, okay, so what can I do? What can I do to pull off what I have to do to continue doing this? And so I looked at all the options, looked at social distancing, timelines when we could do certain things, and I figured out a way. I made 5G zombies, and then we just finished Angry Asian Murder Hornets, and we did it creatively because we're creative people. And I think that, again, is something that you have to have. You can't have that mentality of like an all or nothing thing. It's like, okay, well, what can I do to still push forward? How you project yourself. It's the frame frame that you're giving, budget constraints, and under certain situations like this, you're very limited in what you can do, so it just comes down to being really creative in how you do it. It is a finesse. I go back to my old methods of filmmaking under these times where I'm like, okay, well, I've got $5. How can I make a movie? You pull people together and you put your minds together and everybody does their part. It's definitely something like this was a huge group effort. Both this and 5G Zombies, I gotta give a shout out to everybody, because it's I didn't make it by myself. I have the mind behind it, but it took all these other creative people doing their pieces of the puzzle to make this project happen for all of us, which is how I approach everything. This is always a group effort. It's about all of us growing. It's about all of us succeeding and moving another level up. A movie like this and 5G Zombies, they both got a lot of press attention. They were viral hits with the trailers, and so that's important to all of us, and that's why we do it.
Financing is really, really, really hard, especially. That's the crucial things when you're trying to get your movie out there. And a lot of people are just using the social media just to basically, it almost seems like panhandling for some of these guys, because they're just sitting on their social media hoping people will just hit that like button, hit this, hit that, especially going for the fundraisers. And there's nothing wrong with fundraisers, but at the same time, you as that filmmaker have to have a little bit more of that drive to go out there and do it yourself and try to get as many other alongside you to help move this forward.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny because up until maybe a year or two ago, I got a lot of slack still from people that were like, man, you just make all these movies, they've got to be, crap, the whole, quality over quantity comment. I would get that often. I think at this point I've sort of proven myself that it's a method. In order to sustain this as a lifestyle, you can't just rely on fundraisers. You can't just put a post up and hope everyone's going to throw their money at you. It's there's a lot of things that go into it. It's private investors, it's creative thinking, it's distribution, it's doing work for hire on the side so you can get extra money, it's royalties from doing so many movies. All of those things combined are how I pay my rent every month. So it takes all these different avenues and ways of approaching it that most people don't look at. Just like you said, they'll make a post and they're okay, well, how come no one's giving money to my fundraiser? I got to make my movie and pay my bills. That's the opposite way you should be thinking. You've got to look at the whole picture. You've got to work and build up enough that you can sustain. There's a lot of people that are independent filmmakers that didn't go to film school that are still in the mindset that all they really have to do is make a movie. I got to make a movie, then someone's going to want it, and I'm going to make $1 million, and I'll be set. But in today's day and age, it's so oversaturated because anybody with a cell phone can go make a movie. You have to look at it like it's your film school now, and you have to just get really good and develop, like you said, develop who you are as an artist. So you created a desire that wasn't there before for what you do. You can't just make something and throw it out there and hope it sticks. You got to work your audience. You got to figure out what works. You got to look at your limitations and what you can excel at yourself in order to keep going.
How do you continue to regenerate that revenue and almost circulate that in motion so you can make your new project? How would you use your past projects as your beneficial for revenue?
I think it's important from the beginning to use everything as building blocks. I think that you should always be moving up, and so that's really how you can use your past. It's well, you've done this much to this point, I'm definitely able to do this moving forward. I think that that's important. I think that background is essential in this business. It's what everybody looks at because most people don't go to film school. It's okay, so what have you done? And I think that brand recognition is important, even if it's your own brand that you can build yourself, because that says that there's an audience attached to what you do. Because most companies, for example, they don't want to hire a director if they don't have their own following already. It's the same thing as with Instagram models that get sponsorships. They're not going to give it to Joe Schmo. They're going to give it to Christina, who has 2 billion views on her post. And so you have to have your own audience. You have to have something you bring yourself, which is what's different today than you say 20, 30 years ago in indie filmmaking.
With Killer Hornets, even though there are a lot of people would probably look at this as a silly thing or whatever, but how would you make this as a serious project? Even though it's something, let's say something that you want to just have fun with, but at the same time, how would you actually utilize that as well to extend its potential to get revenue for that and to support yourself?
Keeping it exploitive, because that's what people want. That's what sells. That's what people are going to pay attention to. A movie like Sharknado, that sells. Giant, cheesy-looking CGI murder hornets during the hype of people talking about murder hornets. Most people are going to want to check that out under curiosity. Although it's very temporary. This isn't something that in 10 years people will probably even watch. And I'm aware of that. And so it's a different type of film for me. I made this as something that could get a lot of attention now, and a lot of that was on the hype of 5G Zombies, because I wasn't expecting that. I had some publicity go out for that, and it ended up all over the internet. And, a lot of people were paying attention, and so this is my follow-up to that. So this is a way for me to push and my company into the mainstream eye so that the stuff I do moving forward can get more eyes on it. It's really just a marketing move. I don't care if in 10 years people don't watch this because it will have served its purpose now.
Go ahead and plug in any websites or any links that you want everyone to check out right now.
Definitely everybody should follow me on Facebook. Personal account that's public for everybody. I also have the SCS Entertainment Facebook page. I'm on Instagram as The Only Dirty D. And we have a streaming channel and the Kanaki DVD site. All that can be found on my social media.
There you have it, everybody. That is Director Dustin Ferguson.